Now more than ever before, we are relying on the internet to keep up with the news, stay in touch with friends, shop, and everything in between. That's why it's so important that you reserve your first and last name .vote web address for your upcoming campaign. Secure your digital real estate by owning your name with a .vote. Your name, your campaign, your very own .vote domain. Head to GoDaddy today.
Welcome to Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Sam Stone. Chuck Warren out of the studio today, and we are blessed to have the two talented and lovely women in the studio with me today. Michelle Ugenti-Rita, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Former state legislator in Arizona. Lots of fun going on there right now.
I know. We could spend many segments on that.
And we will get to a little bit of that later in the show, folks, as well. We also have a returning guest, Christina Eichelkraut, joining us. She's going to be featured in the podcast segment. Christina is my friend who's a progressive Democrat and loves to argue with me, so it makes for good radio. Stay tuned. Make sure you download that podcast segment. But first up today, a story that's kind of been breaking in the last few days here, personal for a lot of us here in Arizona with our education system, with what's going on with the sort of intellectual intolerance that is creeping into so much of this country. We have Ann Atkinson, former executive director of the T.W. Lewis Center for Personal Development at Barrett, the Honors College at Arizona State University. She is a Barrett alumna, entrepreneur, public company executive, healthcare real estate expert, wife, mother, triathlete.
Wow.
Heck of an impressive resume. And she helped put together an event, and we want to talk about that because the repercussions of that have been astounding to me. I mean, disheartening and astounding. So, Ann, thank you so much for joining us on Breaking Battlegrounds this morning. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be with you and with your audience today.
Can you tell us, because a lot of people, maybe some folks here in Arizona will know what we're talking about offhand, but can you lay out the background of this, what happened, kind of the timeline, and then where we're at with it today? Because this is really kind of a stunning, disheartening, but also all too predictable now occurrence in higher education. So go ahead.
Absolutely, Sam. At a very high level, the T.W. Lewis Center is a personal development center that puts on speaker programs and workshops and also has some honors courses for the students at ASU's Barrett Honors College. We put on a lot of programs. We had 40 just this last spring semester, and one of those programs was entitled Health, Wealth, and Happiness. This was a program where we brought in experts in those areas. It was optional and open to the public, and it took place at Arizona's home of Broadway at ASU Gamage. And in response to our organizing a program on health, wealth, and happiness, the faculty at the Honors College, not the students, but the faculty, led a national condemnation campaign to chill and suppress and intimidate our right to bring these speakers into campus. They attacked the speakers, our donors, myself, the Lewis Center, and it was really just an incredible response given what we were trying to accomplish with this program. And then finally, a big part of the story is that the Honors College participated in the attempts to suppress this free speech, even despite ASU's very strong policies on free speech. So they took down our marketing. They tried to limit what the speakers were allowed to say. They wanted me to read a warning statement to the audience during my opening remarks. And that is directly incongruent with the robust free speech policies that ASU should be providing to all of those in its community. So I'm here today. I appreciate the invitation just to share my story of what happened to folks that put on an event that was consistent with the intent of their center.
Yeah, not only consistent with the intent of their center, but featuring some very well-known national guests with high public profiles who, legitimately, one of them were, for instance, talking about Robert Kiyosaki, who I consider a friend. Robert is clearly a very healthy man at his age, but he's also amassed a great deal of wealth by being a smart guy, right?
Who were the guests?
So
I
think that's important.
Go ahead, Ann. Yeah.
We had the panel is a 2-hour program. 90 minutes was a panel on health, wealth, and happiness. We had Dr. Radha Gopalan, who's a renowned heart transplant cardiologist, on health. We had Robert Kiyosaki, obviously you know who he is, on wealth, and Dennis Prager on happiness. And then during opening remarks, I spoke, our donor Tom Lewis spoke, and Tom had invited Charlie Kirk to share remarks as well on happiness and human enlightenment.
Well, and for folks who know them and on Breaking Battlegrounds here, we've had a chance. Obviously, Robert is a resident of Phoenix, so I've gotten to know him in a few other ways. But Dennis Prager has come on the program here. We've had a chance to meet him and talk with him. He's a happy guy. He lives a great life.
But what was the criticism from the faculty? What were they so opposed to? I mean, these are speakers that have spoke in front of large and small audiences all over the country.
All over the world.
All over the world, that's right. I mean, what specifically were they so offended by?
Well, that's key here. So the 39 of the 47 faculty at the Honors College that signed the petition condemning the event claimed that the speakers focused primarily on Dennis Prager and Charlie Kirk, but also on Robert Kiyosaki, are purveyors of hate who have publicly attacked women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and institutions of our democracy. They decried ASU platforming and legitimating their views, describing Prager and Kirk as white nationalist provocateurs, antebellum slaveholder apologists, and they claim that these two would undermine the value of the democratic exchange by marginalizing the school's most vulnerable students. So the faculty decided they don't like these speakers. They proved their points by referencing Media Matters in their petition, which Media Matters is a watchdog reporting organization that reports on conservatives. And they determined that the speech they don't like is hate speech, and therefore it's dangerous and unsafe for students.
They're the ones, I feel like, that are a threat to democracy by shutting down free speech. But I think there's a big difference between describing and then actually pointing to actual things these speakers have done to justify their position. I mean, very creative language used in describing why they were offended by these speakers, but I doubt they had specificity and could point to anything, probably large, broad generalities.
One of them was Dennis Prager's criticism of George Soros, which for those who aren't aware, is Jewish on Jewish violence. I don't know how you call that hate in any sense of the word.
You know, what's interesting, the faculty described Prager and Kirk as white nationalist provocateurs, as I mentioned, but I also was pulled into a meeting with my leadership at the Honors College and an outside marketing firm and asked to defend what would stop the Lewis Center from inviting the KKK to campus because these speakers share some of the same values as the KKK.
What?
Now, the speakers that I invited, one is from Sri Lanka, Robert Kiyosaki is of Japanese descent, and Dennis Prager is a religious Jew.
Yeah.
So I thought that these claims, not only from the faculty, but also in meetings with leadership of the Honors College, were really surprising.
Isn't it, to me, and I think one of the sort of fundamental problems underlying situations like this is the idea that students are harmed by hearing views that they might not agree with or that they might find offensive. Isn't that minimalizing these students? Isn't that marginalizing these students? To first, intellectually marginalizing them, but second, emotionally marginalizing them, that they're not smart enough to separate an intellectual discussion from an emotional reaction.
That's a very important point, right? The faculty, by deeming this as hate speech and therefore dangerous and unsafe, are telling the students, we think it is our job to protect you from dangerous speech. When in fact, again, ASU is a big place. It welcomes all sorts of different ideas, and it's not our job as educators to tell anybody what to think. It's to help them learn how to think. And I think that by characterizing this as dangerous hate speech by the faculty using their classroom teaching time and mandatory honors courses to these students, to freshmen nonetheless, to condemn the program and say supporting this talk is dangerous, that I think they're really insulting the students and undermining their intelligence.
And if you mentioned that ASU has a very strong policy on free speech and then they welcome free speech, how did the faculty members get away with this kind of conduct then? If you have ASU out there, strongly supporting a multitude of different mechanisms of speech and variety of guests.
I'm perplexed at again, a university so celebrated for those policies that this is what happens, and that's why I'm telling this story, right? Is that by bringing in speakers that someone doesn't like, this has been the reaction from the faculty and the staff and leadership at the Honors College.
But what's the president? What's Crow doing about it?
I don't know. I would love to know. I have a great amount of respect for him. I appreciated that when I took my concerns, all of these directly up to the very top and through all ASU channels over the past several months, that he took the time to respond and to encourage me and to schedule a meeting with the provost, Nancy Gonzalez, so I could address these concerns with her. I don't know what he's going to do. I'm sure he's, I don't want to assume, but if I were the president of a university here, I would be deeply troubled by the way that my community is undermining my vision.
Yeah, but this isn't the first time they've struggled with this. We've had to pass legislation called free speech zones for our universities because they have struggled to demonstrate that they actually have a very strong policy on free speech and care about a multitude of expressions and opinions.
And this actually worries me, Michelle, because ASU has been one of the better ones, not what I would say good. I don't think anyone has been great at defending free speech in the world of higher education lately, with a very few exceptions. But ASU has generally been better than most. And this kind of thing is very troubling, and we're seeing an increase in these incidents at ASU specifically.
It's a slippery slope, and if it's not course corrected now, I don't see it stopping. So I'm very curious, and I believe Ann is as well, to see what President Michael Crow does. He needs to have a strong, swift reaction, and there needs to be clarity.
Yeah, we're going to be coming back with more from Ann Atkinson, talking about this attack on free speech that continues in too much of our higher education establishment and happened here in Arizona at Arizona State University. We have about 40 seconds before we go to break here. But obviously, Michelle, this is something that isn't going to go away. This is a battle that people need to fight, and I really appreciate people like Ann stepping up and not just meagerly moving on. Because if you read her resume, folks, she's got an incredible resume, incredible background, and she could go on and do almost anything she wants to do. And just, that would be the easy route. Just quietly go away and let this happen. She has stood up. You're hearing it here. She's been on some other programs talking about this. It's important we have these discussions right now.
Absolutely.
Breaking Battlegrounds, back in just a moment. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Sam Stone and Michelle Ugenti-Rita. Also in the studio with us today, Christina Eichelkraut. As always, Jeremy in the booth doing a fantastic job on all our audio fun. And Jamie here, desperately hoping I won't force her onto camera or onto a microphone. She does all our digital work, so thank you to everyone who helps make this show possible. We're continuing on right now with more from Ann Atkinson, former executive director of the T.W. Lewis Center. We're talking about an incident where she had helped arrange a program with some what are perceived as conservative-leaning guests talking about issues of health, wealth, and happiness, and subsequently was terminated under some really sketchy conditions. And what was said about why they did it doesn't really match the reality. And I want Ann to get into that. But also, she wasn't the only person who was damaged by this. So, Ann, what did the university say when they terminated you, and what are they doing here? Because to me, some of their arguments just don't hold water.
Well, a part of what the university said was true, is that Tom Lewis canceled his donor agreement. That's true. That happened this spring. And since then, I had brought new donors to the Honors College, excited to continue the mission of the Lewis Center. So their interest and enthusiasm was based around the intent of the Lewis Center, and that included things like traditional American values, hard work, personal responsibility, civic duty, faith, family, and community service, and also entrepreneurship, career success, happiness, personal finance, and so on. But when I
none of that sounds bad to me, Ann, to be honest with you.
Sounds outrageous.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, that is the reason why I came to the Lewis Center, why I took a sabbatical from a great career in healthcare real estate investment and also a passion for the students. But that reason is why I think it's so important that we have something like that in higher education. And I was really excited to be able to deliver on the intent of the Lewis Center. Now, as executive director, my job is to fulfill the intent, including that language. So the dean of Barrett, who joined as the dean less than a year ago, expressed no interest when I said, look, I have new donors excited to continue this mission. I made that offer on multiple occasions, and then in my firing conversation or meeting on May 30th, when she told me this was purely a fiscal decision, I said, it's not a fiscal decision because I'm telling you, I've brought new donors, a diversified group of funding to keep this program going, so long as we keep our normal and current intent. So that's the part of the story. Perhaps ASU sees as a detail, but in the fact of it, that's everything. By the dean declining to maintain the intent, she dismantled the heart of what the Lewis Center is.
And I got to say, on that point in particular, they're talking about the message that, for instance, this event would send to students from having these speakers there. Well, as I see it, and tell me if you see it differently, but as I see it, what they did in using this excuse that it's the money when you had already raised this, it's cowardice. They're teaching their students cowardice. Because if they were being honest, they would come out and say, we just don't want to have a center with these philosophical foundations here. And that's an argument they're not willing to have. And so they took a route that teaches students, well, you just lie. When you want to get out of an uncomfortable conversation, you just lie your way out of it. Am I wrong about that?
It's unfortunate, right? Because these donors were very excited to have that conversation, and the dean wouldn't even have the conversation. So I think what this tells the students is that in the event you dare to represent values that differ from the prevailing orthodoxy, there will be consequences. And even with my meeting with ASU leadership, the feedback I received was, we allowed the speaker, but you then have to take the consequences. And that is, to me, profound, because that is exactly what happened. So I think this sends the wrong message to the students. And further, the way that the Barrett faculty took these issues into the mandatory classes for honors freshmen, they're raising an environment of fear and intimidation, given the power dynamics of a faculty who controls things like grading and can grade objective topics like participation. So this culture of the condemnation campaign really instilled a culture of fear in the students. I had students come up to me, say, Ann, I really want to attend the Health, Wealth, and Happiness program, but I cannot be photographed at this. I cannot have my faculty member, my professor, see that I attended this event. And others were just outright afraid. They were afraid because their faculty, people that they trust, that are their leaders, that they've developed relationships with through their classes, are telling them this is dangerous. And they don't want to be associated with something that's dangerous. So it's giving the wrong message to students. And the students have probably also seen by me speaking up that in the event you speak up, there will be consequences.
Well, ASU Barrett College needs a consequence. And I think it starts with, maybe an appropriation or a lack thereof. I mean, they feel like they can do this. That's my takeaway. They're not afraid. They're not afraid to have this negative press. They think it's going to, they will weather it. They're not afraid of people speaking up, speaking out. And that's unfortunate because they get away with it way too often. And so they probably need to take it where it hurts, which is in the pocketbook, which is in their bottom line. I mean,
well, it's interesting because I think one of the problems is they don't care that much about the public funding they get anymore. To be
yes,
honest.
they do.
Oh, they care
They're down
about
there
every
crying
dollar
all the time about money.
Oh, but that is a standard tactic for every institution with public dollars, right?
If they didn't care.
One of the things I think worries me is that they put the ideology over the welfare of the students, including potential funding, right? I mean, that's what you're saying here. What they're saying is, hey, we're not worried about any consequences. It's more important to us to keep students from hearing an opposing viewpoint than to concern ourselves with that sort of end.
Right, because they've never felt a consequence.
Fair point. And one of the other elements of this I want to touch on is this didn't just impact you. We have about a minute and a half before we go to break. We can continue on in the next segment if you'd like, but this actually had impact on at least one other person.
Right.
Yes, the events operations manager at ASU Gamage, Lynn Blake, was responsible for organizing this event on behalf of the venue, on behalf of ASU Gamage. And she received tremendous pushback. After our event, she told me that she was berated by ASU Gamage leadership for coordinating an event that did not align with the values of ASU Gamage. And she also has said that the leadership of ASU Gamage asked her why she brought a white supremacist to their venue. She was also fired.
Which was the white supremacist again? It's hard to keep track of all of their insults. Is that Kirk?
Maybe either the Japanese gentleman, the Sri Lankan gentleman,
right,
or the religious Jew. I'm
wow.
not sure.
Incredible.
These stories are just amazing, and the fact that a lot of folks in the country won't ever hear about it because the news is very selective, also as selective as colleges are in their chosen ideology these days. But I mean, I really appreciate you standing up to this, Ann, and coming out. We're going to be following this story as we continue, and we will post that op-ed on Breaking Battlegrounds website and on our social media. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you. Breaking Battlegrounds coming back in just a moment. All right, welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds. This is Sam Stone in the studio today. Michelle Ugenti-Rita, Christina Eichelkraut. Michelle, I really want to thank Ann for coming on and for being willing to talk about this, not just taking her firing quietly, which
right,
she could have done, and would be in many ways the easy way out because she has another option in her career where she can go back and probably make a lot more money than she's been making working at ASU. She was doing this for very good reasons, as you heard. Michael Crow, the ASU president.
Look, you can't be silent. And to your point that you made earlier on with Ann, if this is how you really feel, then justify it.
Yeah.
Don't lie about it. Come out and say that, yes, we're very particular about what ASU looks like they're condoning and the perspective, ideology we want to stand behind. This is not something we support.
Yeah, I mean, come out and say, we refuse to have conservative speakers and thinkers on our campus or have our students exposed to them at any ASU venue. Mm-hmm. And then let's go ahead and have that argument. To me, it is very cowardly and disingenuous. And Michael Crow, again, continues. First, I think he's primarily a developer, not a university leader. I think his major interest is in business, not education. But secondly, I think this happens a lot because he's totally let this university get out of control. For folks who don't know, critical race theory, DEI, ASU is one of the national homes, the sprouting institutions for this. And this has happened under Michael Crow's tenure. And a lot of Republicans in Arizona continue to hold a higher opinion of Crow than certainly I do. Mm-hmm. And part of it is they don't know that this goes on and they don't know what he's done and not done. This guy's an embarrassment at this point. And if we get a Republican governor in there in a couple of years, he needs to be gone.
Well, this is an educational institution. And we've lost sight of that. This is all about, it seems like a lot of times it's about propaganda. It's about putting the university's heavy hand on how students think and believe, and total contradiction in what a university should be and ought to be, which is, a melting pot of ideas and opinions. So it's disconcerting. And look, I wanted to touch on the fact that we have to have legislation that sets up little zones of free speech. That's hardly congruent with a university that says that they support and excel at free speech.
And I agree 100%. It's what free speech zones are an atrocity.
I know. Why
they should never.
You shouldn't
that's
have to
an
have
absolute
them.
atrocity.
It's embarrassing.
It's public land.
Right.
That's all free speech zone.
Right.
The only free speech zone on the planet should be private property, and that just means you're not allowed to stand there while you say it. Go out in the road.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
But see, until they have a consequence, this is not going to change. And this isn't really an ASU predicament. This is happening all over the country. They are not afraid. So we're going to have to do something beyond just sharing the stories. I mean, they have to feel it. I think they have to feel it when it comes to their funding. That's the only thing they respond to. As a former legislator, I can tell you that's the only thing they respond to.
Well, they're funding and jobs. So Ron DeSantis in Florida has taken very strong steps, right? He has replaced the boards. He started firing and getting rid of the DEI departments and the professors behind them. And they're throwing an absolute fit. And every time he just says, I don't care. And he's right.
Because that's where the public sentiment is with someone doing what Ron DeSantis is doing. Not the reverse. You have to push back on these bullies and realize that they don't have the public.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, if you're talking about critical race theory in the confines of a class, right, and you're talking about it as an ideological pole, and you're comparing it to others, that's a very appropriate thing for a university to do. But taking that one singular ideological pole and making it the guide star for your entire university, this is absolutely everything universities were designed not to do. That's
exactly right. And it has to stop. So hopefully things like this bring larger attention, and ASU and Michael Crow are on notice.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're going to have to. This is why local elections matter. This is why your state legislature, all your state seats matter. It's not just about your taxes, although those are important too. But at the end of the day, there really is this huge push to eliminate free speech in educational settings and to limit it. Someone was reading a case. We only have about 45 seconds here. We can come back to some of this in the podcast if we want. But, a school in Massachusetts suspending a student for wearing a shirt that said two genders.
Right. Read about that.
Right? Like, okay. Scientifically, that student's pretty much on point.
Right.
You can argue in an ideological sense, but it's absolutely ridiculous what's going on in our educational system. And it starts at the universities.
Absolutely.
And people have to step up to stop it and do what DeSantis is doing. Folks, Breaking Battlegrounds will be back with more in just a moment. We've got a fantastic returning guest, Mark Skewson, coming up. And then we're going to be talking education. Christina's here gritting her teeth, her progressive teeth. Welcome back to Breaking Battlegrounds with your host, Sam Stone. Chuck Warren out of studio today, but in studio with us, the lovely Michelle Ugenti-Rita and equally lovely Christina Eichelkraut. Christina, thank you so much for joining us. We were going to have a Mark Skewson on talking a little bit about Freedom Fest. Folks, if you haven't had a chance to check that out, go to freedomfest. I don't know if it's .com or .org. Probably both.
Yes.
And it's a great time. I'm going to be there, so you can come to Freedom Fest and see me. Right?
I think that should be the only motivation.
That should be the absolute only motivation. I mean, I'm bringing some other personalities along with me, but they don't matter.
No, that's your B team.
That's
your
right.
A.
So Christina has something interesting she's doing. She's a school board member at Ball School District. We've had her on to talk about that before. But I actually wanted to talk a little bit because one of our ongoing themes for a lot of our listeners has been AI.
Oh.
And we're talking about AI. Christina actually is much more involved than I would ever want to be in the tech world.
And I'm still
board
tangential.
Yeah, she spends a lot of her time wrangling tech bros.
Well, it sounds like a weekend fun.
It sounds like weekend fun if I get a lasso and a barbed wire fence thrown in. So,
like something you do at
Christina
Bottled Wine.
manages to do it. But she's also created a business. There's been a lot of talk about what AI is going to do to various areas of employment. One of those is writing.
Exactly.
You know. So, Christina, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Is AI going to overtake human writing?
I think it definitely has the potential to, but that doesn't necessarily render humans irrelevant. So, as you know, my background, I spent 9 years as a community print journalist, and then I started a digital marketing company. So, when AI and ChatGPT came out, a lot of the groups that I'm involved with copywriting on LinkedIn were like, oh my God, because it's already an oversaturated market. You're already dealing with the perception that it's a hobby, not a skill. That's not helpful. There's a lot there already. So ChatGPT 3 comes in and people are like, oh, you can get all this like quality content. But the fact of the matter is the majority of my clients right now, I'm actually editing AI generated text. And that's actually something, and I'm really marketing hard that I provide human generated content, because a lot of what I do, even in the industrial and technical fields, is not going to be able to be done through autocomplete. So what I mean by that is what people don't understand about AI generated text is that it's using the corpus of knowledge from the past. It can only look past, not forward. So in certain things, if you're developing a new biomedical software, for example, or if you have a blog that's going to rely on emotional appeal for marketing to get users, to get buyers, ChatGPT, it doesn't use syntax well, it doesn't use colloquialisms well, and it certainly can only autocomplete things that are already known. So in industries, both industry and software, where you're having innovation and it's new things looking forward, and oftentimes that does lead to new etymology, new words, new, you'll have new like portmanteau words, things like that. It can't do that. It's going to autocomplete based on the past. So,
and see, Christina just used at least 3 words that no one else in the history of this program has ever used.
Yeah.
Yes, Grammarly is always telling me I use unique words. So I do think there are certain writing functions. There are certain boilerplate things where ChatGPT can be useful. I will point out there was a school district that sent out a condolence letter in another state about a student who died, and then one of the parents ran it through one of the scanners and found out that it was a AI-generated condolence letter, and this did not go over well.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's insulting.
Yeah, so I do think this notion that we're never going to need human writers, we're never going to need, I think there's going to be more of a transition into it's going to be more editing than original writing. But again, if you specialize, for example, in industrial disc grinding, right, and you're appealing to a military contractor and they need a very specific kind of steel disc grinding for their equipment. Mm-hmm. That's not something I don't care how good your prompt is, you're not going to get that from ChatGPT 3. You need to have a human conveying that to another human. And then it's just true in terms of just innovation, things like that. There's new biomedical terminology because of some of the advancements being made right now in prosthetic software. That's another great example.
Well, that's one of the things I really hadn't heard anyone put it that way. I mean, essentially between a software that can look backwards.
Yes.
But humans obviously can look forwards. And at this point, ChatGPT can't do that.
It is autocorrect. People don't understand that. Now, there's reason to believe, 10, 20 years down the line, we're going to have neural networks that are advanced enough where you're going to have those associations. But as of right now, it is glorified autocorrect. Let us be clear that it is going from a corpus. How does ChatGPT happen? There are you have tens of thousands of people in developing countries like Nigeria, for example, and they literally have been spending the last 20 years doing very rote, repetitive, very low-paid work to do, whenever you get that box that says, click on every square that has a traffic light, versions of that. So they might have to stand back and take a picture of themselves in a motorcycle helmet and take a picture of themselves in a T-shirt as opposed to a suit jacket. That's how these models learn, right? So it can only look backwards.
Right. I saw a wonderful documentary that talked about this on Netflix, and that's exactly their point, or individuals that were critiquing artificial intelligence and some of this stuff was that they can only do what's already been done. And so there's a handicap there in, like Christine was saying, for particular industries where you need to write and talk about things that are going to happen. And only a human can really contemplate that.
I've got to say, I know people have talked about AI getting to that point, but I'm not sure that's a point we actually want AI to get to. Is it?
I think that's a question worth asking, right? So I wrote an article actually for my nonprofit that talks about this, and it talks about the sociological impact of when you remove humans from human interaction. And we know from a variety of circumstances, there's quantitative data about this, there's qualitative data. The more you remove people from human reactions, the more you see a deterioration of human traits that include empathy, that include critical thinking. And I'm talking about, and this is not high level, high tier academic stuff. This is like if you're using the self-checkout at the grocery store, for example, as opposed to just saying hello to your checker. I have a checker that he's my favorite checker at Safeway, and I know that his kids graduated college. I've been going to the Safeway for like 5 years.
Wait a minute.
Chat, right? Right? This is a human interaction. We're not besties. We don't hang out, but you kind of like catch up on little tidbits about each other's lives. And there's a real underestimation of the importance of those interactions in terms of what that does to you as a human, as opposed to like scanning through a self-checkout.
What's funny, a couple of days ago, there was a New York Post piece out about how disconnected and socially isolated Gen Z is because they grew up, their education really got interrupted in the pandemic with digital learning, remote learning, now remote work. And they were talking about this, and I read this whole piece, and I'm like, man, this is really tough if you were right in those key years. And you get to the end, and they say, asking the experts they're interviewing for this what the answer is. And the literal closing of this was, oh, they're going to have to learn new ways to communicate, like an app.
Yeah.
I'm like,
good joke.
What?
Yeah.
The
I
answer
don't think
to
people are going to tolerate this, though. I mean, I think you're going to see people crave and look for opportunities to interact, and you'll see businesses try to specify what kind of material they're getting, if it was AI generated versus human generated, if you will.
One thing, so I've, some folks may know, I've started doing a little bit of work with Y-Refi,
Yes.
and I actually I need to do a sponsor read before we close out here about them, because since they started sponsoring us, I started working with them. And their office is a little bit hybrid between remote and in person. And we've actually been having a lot of conversations, like maybe what we need to start doing is scheduling some sort of office social hours, essentially, where we're coming in and doing these various team and group building things, even if that's a little uncomfortable for people, just simply because otherwise you're missing so much of the interaction of office workers. I forgot, in the days when I go in, there's a bunch of people in there. It's really fun to be able to go around. You have a bunch of coworkers you can sit there and chat with. You have different conversations. You hear stories about lives that are totally unlike yours, and you learn from them. Man, that's so different than the isolated environment. A lot of days when I go in there and I'm one of only two people in that office, and I'll be in there for 3 or 4 hours. It's quiet. It's sort of intimidating,
Right.
In that sense. I think we really need to focus right now on the discussion about AI and how it changes human interaction, and maybe put some limits on it for that reason.
I think they're definitely, I think what we're going to have to do is, I think you spoke to something, and I already have seen that pushback at different, there's different advertising firms and other friends of mine in marketing, where one thing they're doing now is like they will call up and they will say, if part of their package includes web copy, they'll say like, you're not just going to have something dealing with ChatGPT 3,
Right.
because they're like, I'm not going to pay $700, $800, $1,000 a month to have you plug in a prompt that takes you 30 seconds that I could do myself, right? And that's a valid point too. And syntax, tone, colloquialism, slang, like all of these things, they're valid. And ChatGPT is getting very good at them. But I think there is a place for ChatGPT. There's a lot of places where it eliminates potential for human error. Certain rote programming, certain boilerplate things are fine. Sure. But I think this notion of simply absconding humanity just because we can is perhaps folly. I don't think that's necessarily going to lead to any good outcomes for anybody.
Christine? Are we having enough conversations? Is the tech world, because you're closer to this than
I'm not that close to it, but yeah.
But you're a lot closer.
I'm
you're
tech
a lot closer
adjacent at best. I'm tech adjacent
Okay.
at best.
That's better. That's better than tech distant like me. I still struggle to turn on an iPhone. So let's.
You're getting there, though. I saw you try to turn it on this morning.
I was working on it, but I haven't gotten it yet.
Right. Exactly.
I figured now that I am here with Jamie, I just hand it to her and she can do it. Yeah. No, but are the discussions about the morality, about the how far AI should go? Are those happening?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. 100%. Yeah, that's absolutely happening. I don't think it's. I think there are a lot of people who actually understand how this technology works and understands where it is, and they're not thrilled about the public perception of it. It's like the public is perceiving a Ferrari when what we have is like a very souped up Impala, right? That does have power seats and does have power windows, and it's very good, but it is not a Ferrari. And you have kind of like this public perception of like, let's all get in the Ferrari. So I think there are definite concerns about that. And I think there are a lot of concerns. I will say one thing about the tech industry as a whole that I just really kind of grinds my gears is you have all these leaders now and all these developers of AI that now that the genie's out of the bottle, and this is a tradition in tech going back to Oppenheimer and the A-bomb, right? Now that the genie's out of the bottle and we're already here, they're going to sign a letter and they're going to talk, about, oh, we're really worried now. Right. And it's like, well, you could have put that in your research paper prior to releasing this. And there's discussions to be had about open source technology versus proprietary. What is this going to do in terms of access? If you have countries where you don't even have internet access, how are we exacerbating the disparity in terms of access to tech, and how does that exacerbate the detrimental consequences of that disparity? That's another conversation to be had. It's like anything. You can't take something as general as all morals and apply it to all tech in all situations, because there are plenty of situations where this is going to be great. It's going to help people. It's going to further us. It's going to bring us forward, right? There's going to be plenty of situations where it does the exact opposite. But the sociological component in terms of what it's doing to us as humans, as just, the warm, fuzzy, soft science stuff that people are so quick to dismiss nowadays with, bowing to the altar of STEM, that needs to happen. It's that T-shirt. This all comes down to the T-shirt that says science will tell you how to bring back the T-Rex. The humanities will tell you why it's not a good idea. It is that T-shirt. Everything comes back down to that.
It's like a T-shirt theme, and the other T-shirt you brought up that the student wore that said there's two genders.
Right.
It's all about that T-shirt too.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, so that's actually it's really interesting to me because a lot of these conversations are not happening the way they need to be happening at the highest levels right now. And one of the things with tech is, and you served in the Arizona legislature, how many people there are really tech proficient?
No one.
Nobody.
How
many in Washington, Christina, do you think are really?
Well, I'm going to say Senate. I'm going to say Lindsay Epstein. Actually, she knows what she's about.
Is she a Democrat? Because then she doesn't.
she knows what she's about when it comes to tech.
Folks, you heard it here, but do check out our friends at InvestYRefi.com. InvestYRefi.com. You can help somebody who has a default student loan get their life back on track, reduce their payment, and you can make a fantastic profit up to 10.25% APR while they do it. That's a deal you can't pass up. It's the ultimate form of capitalism. One person with a need, one person with an opportunity. Give them a call at 888-YREFI24, or again, log into InvestYRefi.com.
Running for office? You need a campaign website. Introducing the web address of the democratic process, .vote. So how do you purchase your .vote website? Visit www.yourname.vote. Type your website name, example www.johnsmith.vote. It's available. Add your web address to your cart and check out. Once checked out and have received confirmation, you may begin to create and utilize your website to connect and engage voters. To learn more, visit get.vote. Happy campaigning!